Sometimes we mistake shared struggles for a lifelong vow, failing to realize that some people only stick by you because they have no other options at the time. Real growth happens when you find the strength to walk away from a toxic relationship the moment the truth comes to light, making room for the bright future you actually deserve. I went through the trenches with Sarah Sullivan during our leanest years. We pinched every penny and endured endless setbacks until the firm we built together finally hit the big leagues. Shortly after our success, Sarah's ex, Henry Thorne, sent me an incredibly hostile text. He told me to watch my back because he was coming to take Sarah away from me. I didn't hesitate to fire back. I told him to get lost and asked if he'd been hiding under a rock while the rest of the human race was busy evolving. I couldn't believe he had the nerve to say something so pathetic. Little did I know, the real betrayal was much closer to home. It turns out he wasn't the only evolutionary reject. The other one had been standing right by my side the entire time. It started when I happened to see a new post from Henry Thorne on Facebook. In the photo, Sarah and Henry were staring into each other's eyes. Their hands are locked together. The caption read, "Our love has always been the same." I stared at my screen, completely paralyzed. 5 minutes later, Sarah commented on the post. She wrote that she wanted to be with him forever and ever. It was a beautiful public declaration of love. It would have been even better if I weren't the man Sarah was supposed to marry in a week. I called her immediately. She declined the call instantly. A second later, an iMessage popped up saying she was in a meeting and not to bother her. It hit me then. This morning, she told me she had a massive deal to close and begged me not to interrupt her work. I guess the deal was pretty big after all. It looked like the kind of high-stakes merger that only happens behind closed doors in a hotel room. I sat there on the couch, unable to move, my mind a complete blank. An hour later, she finally called me back. Her voice was as sweet and gentle as ever as she asked, "Morrison, honey, is everything okay?" Hearing that familiar, calm tone made my skin crawl. She probably didn't realize that her little romantic post had already gone viral. For 5 years, from the age of 23 to 28, I was her rock. I was there when she had nothing, and I stayed until she became the CEO of 2 major firms. She wasn't born into old money, but she was a heavy hitter in the Chicago business scene. We met at a career fair during my senior year when she was trying to find talent for her startup. Every other corporate booth was packed with students, while hers was a ghost town. I felt a bit sorry for her, so I decided to sit down. She immediately started pitching her vision with such passion. She told me the company was just taking off and needed talented people to build the foundation. She promised me a seat at the table as a founding partner. God, she really was desperate back then. I was the perfect target, a naive grad who fell for every dream she sold me. I sold my soul to that company, even when it meant drinking myself into a hospital bed to close a client. I spent countless nights pulling all-nighters to fix project proposals. Even when headhunters came calling with massive salary bumps, I never even looked at them. I climbed from a clueless trainee all the way to CEO. Our romantic relationship was a total accident. 2 years ago, after a long night of celebrating a municipal contract, we both had way too much to drink. I woke up the next morning to her stroking my face. She whispered, "Morrison, let's make this official." I didn't say yes right away. To be honest, I wasn't even sure if anything had actually happened that night. But Sarah was breathtakingly beautiful. I only managed to hold out for 3 days before I gave in. Looking back, we really did have some incredible times together. We used to pull all-nighters and watch the sun come up over the Chicago skyline. After corporate parties, we'd end up lying on a football field somewhere, just staring at the stars. We faced the elitist sneers of the business world and the shoves of security guards together. I remember one night, after a late meeting, we were walking through Millennium Park. She suddenly grabbed my hand and just sprawled out right in the middle of the plaza, totally ignoring the people staring at us. She looked at me and said, "Morrison, mark my words. One day we're going to have an office right here. Our company logo will be at the top of one of these skyscrapers." I laughed and told her she was delusional. I reminded her that this was the most expensive real estate in Chicago and that 2 kids with a struggling startup didn't belong there. Sarah didn't get angry. She just turned to me with a look of absolute conviction. She promised that when we made it, she'd buy me a penthouse right there as a thank you for never leaving her side. The way she looked at me in that moment was so real that it broke my heart. I think that was the day I truly fell for her. 3 days after we officially became a couple, it was time for the company's annual gala. By then, she had actually kept her promise. The firm was headquartered right by Millennium Park, and she had bought me that penthouse she talked about as a bonus for my hard work. We had grown from a 2-person operation to a team of over 300. At the gala, she took my hand and led me onto the stage. She looked out at the crowd with so much pride. She told everyone that without Morrison Bennett, the company would have folded years ago. She said that she wouldn't even be standing there if it wasn't for me. Then she asked everyone to raise a glass in my honor. I'll admit, the praise went to my head a little, but I knew I had earned it. I was the one who kept her going every time she hit a wall. I was the one closing the deals that kept the lights on. I was the reason the company didn't go under. When we expanded and opened our second location, I did all the heavy lifting. I handled the legal work, the financing, and the hiring of all the senior partners. After the party, she was buzzed and feeling celebratory. She insisted on coming back to my place to talk about the future of the firm. One thing led to another, and we ended up in bed again. The next morning, I looked her in the eye and told her I was all in. She beamed and hugged me tight. She told me she had been in love with me for years. She said she'd never find another man who would sacrifice as much for her as I did. I was aware of her ex, Henry Thorne. They were the classic college sweethearts. They were in the same classes and dated for all 4 years of university. After graduation, Henry wanted her to move back to some small town with him, but Sarah refused to leave the city. They ended things on relatively good terms. The truth was, she only started the business to prove him wrong. She wanted to show him exactly what he was missing. She confessed that to me one night when she was wasted on the football field. She told me that if Henry had just stayed in Chicago, they'd probably be married by now. She said she never would have bothered with the startup life and would have been happy with a boring desk job. There was a hint of nostalgia in her voice, but she seemed honest about it. I never felt threatened by Henry. Everyone has baggage from their past. A year ago, Henry moved back to Chicago and started following me on Instagram. I just followed him back without thinking twice about it. I didn't even bother telling Sarah. I genuinely believed we were soulmates. Looking back, my ego really blinded me. Even after seeing that post, a part of me wanted to believe it wasn't true. That's why I didn't confront her on the phone. I grabbed my keys and left the house. I drove straight to the trendy bistro Henry had tagged his photo. It was a romantic spot Sarah and I had visited back when it first opened. I pulled up and saw them immediately. Henry was handing her a red rose, and Sarah was blushing as she took it. She was wearing a gorgeous blue dress that perfectly matched Henry's blue suit. It was a coordinated couple's outfit, plain as day. My stomach dropped. I leaned against a tree on the opposite side of the street and dialed her number. She looked at her phone, annoyed, and silenced the call. A second later, the same automated iMessage popped up. In a meeting, please don't bother me. I felt a wave of pure, white-hot rage. It was a mix of being lied to and the sheer agony of betrayal. I stood there, shaking, trying to get my breathing under control. It took forever to finally find my composure. I pulled off my wedding band and hurled it at the restaurant's window. The loud crack of metal hitting the glass worked perfectly. Sarah looked up instantly. The moment she saw me standing there, her face went pale. She scrambled out of her chair and ran out of the restaurant toward me. Henry, looking confused, followed right behind her. When Henry realized who I was, a smug little grin spread across his face. I looked at Sarah and told her she was absolutely pathetic. I kept my voice low and cold. I've spent years learning how to keep a poker face in high-pressure situations, but seeing them in their matching outfits made me want to throw up. It was physically repulsing. Sarah saw where I was looking. She turned to Henry and told him he needed to leave because she had to handle something. Henry just chuckled and stepped in front of her, physically blocking me from her. He said, "You must be Morrison. Sarah was just telling me all about you. Don't get the wrong idea." He looked me in the eye and said there was nothing going on. I wished it were true, but his hand was firmly planted on her hip. It was a blatant move to show me who he thought she belonged to. I didn't hide my disgust for the man. Sarah quickly brushed his hand away when she saw my reaction. I stepped forward, shoved Henry aside, and stared her down. I told her she had 10 seconds to get that loser out of my sight. Henry's face twisted in anger. He told me I was being rude and shouldn't be using that kind of language. I actually laughed out loud at that. I asked him if his brain had leaked out of his ears and if he was always this stupid or if today was a special occasion. I told him he must have missed the evolutionary bus because there was clearly nothing going on upstairs. I couldn't believe he was actually standing there trying to lecture me on manners. Henry's face went beet red as he finally turned and walked away. Once he was gone, I walked back into the bistro. My heart was still pounding with pure rage from that Facebook post. Now that I had vented a bit, the adrenaline was fading, leaving a dull ache in my stomach. I sat down right where Henry had been sitting. Sarah looked sick to her stomach, and honestly, she should have. I didn't say a word to her. I just flagged down the waiter and started ordering. It was one of those cheesy places that gives every couple a red rose at the table. The same waiter came back, looking incredibly awkward. When he handed Sarah another rose, she just stared at it like it was a snake. She couldn't believe I was doing this. She clearly wasn't expecting me to stay and eat. I started cutting into the steak and took a huge bite. While I chewed, I pointed at the roses and asked her what she was planning to do with them. I asked her if she really thought there was any point in keeping up the charade. She whispered my name in this pathetic, pleading voice, begging me to listen. I cut her off immediately. I told her I was trying to eat and asked if she was trying to make me sick with her excuses. She shut up after that. I sat there, eating for a solid hour while my mind raced. I was already planning my next moves. I was running through all the legalities of a divorce in my head. I'm not dying, and I'm not crazy. I know that if you forgive someone for this once, they'll just do it again and again until there's nothing left of you. We don't have kids, and the wedding hasn't happened yet. So a clean break was the only smart option. Our only real tie was the business. She owned the main firm, but the Chicago branch was legally mine. We didn't have a prenup, but I wasn't the type of guy to try and take half her money just because of a piece of paper. I was just trying to figure out how to walk away with what was rightfully mine. I could tell she was sitting there stressing about the wedding invitations. She actually thought we were still going through with it. Once I finished my plate, she finally found her voice. She looked at me and said she wasn't going to let me divorce her. I was floored by her sheer audacity. I asked her what exactly she expected us to do. I asked if she wanted a three-way marriage. I joked about her standing at the altar between me and Henry, promising to love us both for the rest of her life. She told me to stop being ridiculous and reiterated that she wouldn't sign any papers. It was then I realized that having a conscience was a serious disadvantage when dealing with someone as cold as her. She just sat there crying silent tears. I asked her point blank when the affair started. I wanted to know if she was already cheating before we signed the marriage papers. She was silent for a long time before whispering that they weren't together. I just laughed in her face. It was such a pathetic lie. I asked if they were just using each other for sex then. I asked if she was just window shopping to keep our marriage exciting. Sarah wasn't used to being talked to like that. She was the boss, after all. I could see the guilt flash into anger, but she managed to keep her cool. She told me I was too emotional and that we should talk in a few days. I just nodded. I knew I was too angry to be rational anyway. My brain was fried from the rage. I needed time to clear my head and figure out my assets. I was going to make sure she didn't get a single dime out of me after what she did. She tried to start talking in the car, but she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. She stayed silent the whole way back. As soon as we walked through the door, I went straight to the bedroom and locked it. A little later, she came to the door in her pajamas, looking like a kicked puppy. I didn't even let her in the room. I just pushed her back into the hallway. I told her we'd been together for 5 years and asked if she really thought I was the type of man to accept her sloppy seconds. All the anger I'd been holding back finally boiled over. She had the nerve to tell me I was being mean. She said Henry never spoke to her that way. I just let out a cold laugh. I told her she was right. I wasn't like Henry. He didn't have to do anything except whisper a few lies to have her barking like a dog and begging for his attention. Her face went white because she knew I was right. Everything I had done for her over the years was a matter of record. I slammed the door in her face. I could hear her outside, sobbing and apologizing over and over. I slumped against the door, my chest tight with a pain that made it hard to breathe. 5 years of my life were flashing before my eyes. I remember the day I signed my first contract with her. She had taken my hand and promised that we were going to be the greatest team the business world had ever seen. I remembered us lying under the stars, drunk and dreaming. She told me that one day we'd be so successful we wouldn't have to debase ourselves for clients anymore. I remembered the morning after we first slept together. She held me and promised that she would be by my side forever. Even on the day we got married, she looked at me and called me her husband, asking me to guide her for the rest of our lives. She set fire to every single dream I had built over the last 5 years. The pain and rage were almost physical. I was lying there with a pounding headache when a notification popped up on Instagram. It was a DM from Henry Thorne. He asked if I knew the real story behind that Facebook post. He said Sarah had been hiding their relationship for a long time. The realization that she was sleeping with him after we were legally married made my stomach flip. I actually ran to the bathroom and threw up. Those two were absolutely vile. I spent the next few days in bed, literally sick with grief. Sarah played the part of the devoted wife, staying by my side and nursing me as if she actually cared. She even blocked Henry on everything right in front of me. But I could see her phone lighting up with notifications from unknown numbers. I knew exactly who was texting her. By the third day, Henry lost his cool and sent me a message. He claimed he wasn't trying to steal her and asked why I was forcing her to block him. I didn't even bother replying. He sent another one, telling me that since I was playing hardball, he was going to take her back for real. He wasn't bluffing. A few minutes later, her phone rang from an unknown number. I saw the panic in her eyes the second she saw the screen. After days of not leaving my side, she suddenly stood up. She started heading for the door in a hurry. I asked her where she was going, and she froze. She lied and said there was an emergency at the office that she had to handle. I just laughed and asked if she'd stay if I told her not to go. She hesitated for a heartbeat, whispered an apology, and walked out the door anyway. As soon as she was gone, I packed my bags and wiped her access from all my devices and the house security system. I'd spent 3 days thinking, and I was done. I couldn't be with someone as tainted as her. If she wanted to play games, she could play them without me. I moved into the small studio I kept near the Chicago office. I'd originally bought the place just to have somewhere to crash after long work nights, so very few people knew about it. My first move was to call a realtor and put the penthouse Sarah gifted me on the market. I'd barely unpacked when David Whitmore, my partner at the branch, showed up. I asked if it was about business, and he just nodded, looking serious. I've been spending all my time running the Chicago office lately. I'm sure that's when she started seeing Henry Thorne again. But honestly, the details didn't even matter anymore. If they wanted to be together, that was their business. I couldn't play babysitter forever. Once we finished our meeting, David gave me a playful look. He called me a workaholic and asked why I wasn't getting ready for the big wedding. I just looked at him and said the wedding was off. David's smile vanished. He asked me what was going on, pointing out that Sarah and I had been a power couple for years. He couldn't believe we were actually over. I didn't give him the messy details. Some things you just keep to yourself to maintain a little dignity. I just told him I was saving him the cost of a wedding gift and that he should be thanking me. He took the hint and didn't push. We've been friends long enough to know when to back off. I started ushering him toward the door. I told him to stop gossiping and go talk to his father about our next investment round. After he left, I went to my parents' place and broke the news to them over dinner. I asked them to start calling the relatives to tell them the wedding was off. My dad was absolutely livid. If Sarah hadn't been a woman, my old man would have probably hunted her down himself. My mom was the voice of reason. She told me it was a blessing that we found out now rather than after the ceremony or after having kids. She was right. It would have been a nightmare to untangle later. I was so relieved they had my back. They supported the divorce 100%. The next morning, Sarah called me, sounding desperate. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the office. She was already there when I arrived, with 2 coffees waiting on the table. She looked at me with those big, tearful eyes and asked why I'd changed the locks on the house. I didn't even want to hear it. I just slid the divorce papers across the table. Her face went pale the second she saw what they were. She started crying and swearing she'd never sign them. She begged me to think about the families and how embarrassing it would be to cancel the wedding so close to the date. I told her that she clearly didn't care about her dignity when she was with Henry, so why start now? I didn't care how much I was hurting her feelings. I told her I'd already sent all her belongings to her office. I reminded her that the penthouse was in my name only and that she was no longer welcome there. I have no idea what lies she told her parents, but her mother called me that night. She started off all sweet, trying to talk me out of it. When she realized I wasn't budging, her tone shifted. She admitted Sarah made a mistake, but said I was being the unreasonable one for calling off the wedding at the last minute. She had the nerve to ask me if I really thought I could find anyone better than Sarah. She reminded me that my career and my home were all thanks to her daughter. I was trying to stay civil, but she was really pushing it. I told her flat out that I built my own success and that her daughter hadn't given me anything. I told her that Sarah was lazy and that without my hard work, her precious company would be nothing. I told her to stop trying to manipulate me. I told her that if she thought cheating was so forgivable, I hoped her husband found a few mistresses of his own. She absolutely lost it and started screaming insults at me. She screamed that she'd always been against us getting married and called me a nobody. I just called her a bitter old woman and hung up. I knew exactly why she hated me. I never let her walk all over me. When we opened the Chicago office, she tried to force a bunch of her useless relatives onto the payroll. Sarah was too scared to say anything to her mother back then. I was the one who said no and didn't back down. When Sarah and I were getting ready to sign the papers, she tried to act like she was doing me a favor by letting me into the family. She actually told me that because I was marrying into the Sullivan family, our kids had to take their name. She thought I was going to be some pushover son-in-law. I told her she needed to learn some manners and that having a little money didn't hide the fact that she was trash. I wasn't going to let her treat me like a servant. I told her that money doesn't buy class and that she was acting like an animal. That was the day she decided she was going to destroy me. After the wedding, she was at our place constantly. She'd look at our housekeeper and complain about the cost, then ask me why I wasn't the one staying home to take care of Sarah. When I'd ignore her, she'd whisper to Sarah that she needed to watch me closely. She'd say I was probably cheating on her every time I had a business dinner. I told Sarah right in front of her mother that she needed to grow a backbone. I asked her if she had let her mother brainwash her into being a complete idiot. I told her I couldn't believe she'd listened to such garbage. Her mother started crying, and Sarah looked at me with that pathetic, helpless expression. I didn't let her say a word before I started on her, too. I asked her if she was really going to let her mother accuse me of cheating without saying a word. I told her she was a coward for not standing up for her husband. She went quiet after that. She knew she couldn't win an argument with me. I really thought we could just have a quiet, dignified divorce after the whole Henry mess, but I should have known better. The very next day, she showed up at my office. She told me she'd give me the divorce, but only if I walked away with absolutely nothing. She demanded that I sign over all my shares in the Chicago branch and give her back the title to the penthouse. She told me that if I agreed to go through with the wedding, we could negotiate the terms. I was absolutely disgusted by how manipulative she was. I realized then that she never loved me. She just married me because I was the only one willing to slave away for her company. She knew that without me, she had no control over the Chicago branch. I couldn't believe she was actually asking for everything. I just stared at her, wondering if she had lost her mind. She started her little manipulation routine again. She told me that everyone in our social circle has affairs and that it wasn't a big deal. She asked if I knew anyone who actually got a divorce over a little fun on the side. I lost it and started laughing. I asked her how people in her podunk hometown handled it when someone was caught cheating. She turned on me instantly, calling me a pathetic orphan and saying I didn't belong in her world. She asked me who I thought I was. She looked genuinely pained for a moment before taking a deep breath and telling me she'd ended things with Henry Thorne. She promised she'd never speak to him again. I didn't believe a word of it, and I didn't care either. I knew she was the first one to run to him when he had his little suicide scare the other day. Henry had posted some dramatic nonsense on Facebook about how life wasn't worth living without her. It was such a pathetic cry for attention, and I knew she was smart enough to see through it. I left a comment on his post telling them they deserved each other and wishing them a long life of misery together. Then I blocked them both. The wedding date came and went. Since she was refusing to sign the papers, I just filed for a contested divorce. That's when she really started to panic. She came crawling back, acting all humble. She literally got on her knees and begged me for another chance. She blamed the whole thing on being drunk when Henry Thorne came to see her. I took off my pants right there. She looked at me like she thought I was going to take her back. I just looked at her and told her she was too disgusting to touch and that she could have the pants because I didn't want anything she'd been near. She started showing up at my office every day, trying to play the part of the grieving wife. One night, I saw her in the lobby and noticed a fresh hickey on her neck. It was almost funny. I told her she was a terrible actress and pointed out the mark on her neck. She looked in the mirror and nearly fainted when she saw it. My peace didn't last long before Henry Thorne started texting me again, asking me why I was still alive. I didn't hesitate to give him a piece of my mind. I told him I wasn't a coward like him who used fake suicide threats for attention. He knew he couldn't beat me in a text war, so he showed up at my office to confront me. He sat down and told me that Sarah was the one who brought him back to Chicago a year ago. He gave me this smug look and asked if I knew what she'd said to him. He claimed she told him that her biggest regret was not leaving with him years ago. He said she told him she'd give up everything just to be with him. I just looked at him and asked why she was fighting the divorce if she loved him so much. That wiped the grin right off his face. I told him he was just after her money, and she was just chasing a ghost. I asked him how they managed to convince themselves it was love. He got desperate and yelled at me to just sign the papers. I picked up my coffee and threw it right in his face. I told him I didn't care that he was a homewrecker, but I couldn't stand his self-righteous attitude. I told him he was nothing more than a boy toy for her. He started crying like a baby, which was just embarrassing to watch. I leaned in and whispered my real plan to him. When I left the shop, I saw David Whitmore outside the window, trying to hear what we were saying. David looked at me like I'd lost my mind. He couldn't believe I hadn't punched the guy out. I just pointed at Henry, who was still sitting there with coffee dripping off his face. David's mood changed instantly. He dragged me off to lunch to get the full story. He reminded me that, as a partner, he had a right to know what was going on. He threatened to pull his funding if things got messy. I ended up telling him the whole story. David was furious. He decided right then and there to pull all his money out of Sarah's main firm. He said he didn't want to be in business with someone that unstable. A month later, things started falling apart for her. Two of her biggest partners refused to renew their contracts once they were up. Sarah confronted me, blaming me for her company's troubles. She said I shouldn't be sabotaging the firm just because we were getting a divorce. She had the nerve to call the company our baby. I hadn't actually done anything to her company yet, but honestly, she deserved whatever happened to it. I asked her why I would care about a company I didn't even own shares in. She realized then that it wasn't me who was behind her sudden run of bad luck. She tried to apologize and started with the sweet talk again, begging to get back together. It eventually came out that she just wanted me to help her win back those 2 clients I had originally landed. I put the divorce papers on the table and told her that if she signed them, I might consider helping her out when I had some free time. Sarah wasn't that stupid. She knew the second she signed those papers, I'd be coming for her clients. She knew my help was never going to happen. She practically ran out of the office. But she'd be back. She was going to sign those papers sooner or later, especially after the text I got from Henry Thorne yesterday. A week later, she was back to sign the papers. I made it clear that I was taking every single thing that was rightfully mine. I wasn't going to let her walk away with a dime of my money. I didn't take anything of hers. I just wanted my own assets. I was finally free of her. But even after the divorce, she kept showing up at my office, claiming she was doing inspections. Henry Thorne finally lost it at a board meeting. He started yelling at her, asking why she was still obsessed with me now that they were finally married. Henry's little outburst made a huge scene. Sarah was terrified of what he might do next. She finally had no choice but to buy out my remaining shares in the company just to get me out of the picture. 3 months later, I walked away with a fat check and a clean slate. It wasn't long before David showed up with a group of her former investors, telling me they wanted to back my new venture. Apparently, Henry had filled every open position in the company with his useless relatives. The place had become a joke, and the real investors were jumping ship as fast as they could. A year later, Henry's dad stole $70 million from the company to go gambling in Las Vegas. He lost it all in a weekend. Sarah didn't hesitate to press charges and send him to prison. Her companies were in total collapse after that. Even after she lost everything, she kept hanging around my new office. I finally had to hire security just to keep her away from me. I didn't see her again until David's wedding 6 months later. She was working as the event manager for the hotel. She looked tired and broken, and that spark in her eyes was completely gone. I walked past her and told her she looked good in the uniform. She looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole and die. I noticed a woman in a janitor's uniform nearby. It was Sarah's mother. I couldn't help but ask her how the Empress enjoyed her new job cleaning toilets. Sarah grabbed her mother and practically ran away from me. I just stood there and laughed. Remember, when you stop settling for less and start standing up for yourself, you're not losing anything but the dead weight holding you back. You're winning back your life.